Hello everyone. Thank you for clicking on this video. I hope you can be entertained by the stories we provide. This time I will tell the story of a woman who started as a bank employee and was influenced by the magic sent by her ex-boyfriend from her friend. Don't forget to prepare snacks and a glass of warm tea so you can be more comfortable. If you are in bed, immediately use a blanket to feel warmer. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Enjoy watching and listening. In 2019, I applied for a job as a customer collector at a bank and was accepted. After I told my family, I was assigned to a village. I was ordered to work in the village for a few days, and had to stay in a dormitory provided by the company, as a place for job training, before becoming a permanent employee. After my family gave permission, I packed my clothes and other things I needed while I was there. I prepared to leave for the dormitory at 6 a.m. Using a motorbike, I drove through a village, past cassava plantations, coffee plantations, and the dormitory was in a remote village. And the last thing I passed was a palm oil plantation. Before I arrived at the dormitory, there was a large gutter or ditch that no longer had any running water. There was a fence, and in front of the dormitory there was a very large mango tree. After I arrived at the dormitory, there were already 12 bank employees there. And indeed, they had been assigned to the village for quite a long time. When I and other employees were conducting a work briefing, I was ordered by the head of the bank branch to conduct community socialization myself. If other employees did the socialization, there were 2 and 3 people. However, I was trusted by the head of the bank branch to do it myself. After the work briefing was finished, I left at 9 a.m. The distance was quite far from the dormitory. Before I socialized with the community, I first asked permission from the village head in a village, and then I socialized with the community's houses by going door to door. After I had done the socialization and was about to go home to the dormitory at 6 p.m. At that time, it was drizzling. At first I took shelter for a moment, and my work friends told me to go home to the dormitory. Because the rain was only drizzling, I decided to go home. When I arrived at the dormitory alley, suddenly there was a fog in front of my eyes, and it was very quiet. Not like usual. Usually in the alley there are people walking. And in the alley the road was also damaged, and had not been repaired, but it was still passable by motorbike. After I almost arrived at the dormitory, suddenly, the motorbike just died and would not start. Even though previously my motorbike had never had any problems. And the fuel was also full. I got off the motorbike, intending to crank the motorbike. But I saw the mango tree leaves moving as if blown by the wind. But at that time I felt there was no big wind. I thought positively, when I was about to crank the motorbike again. Immediately I took out my cell phone to turn on the flash. Suddenly something fell. I thought it was a mango or something. After I looked, there was nothing. And when I looked up, there was an eye that shone as if it was glaring at me. Over time, when I continued to look at the eye, its shape became clearer. And it was a black figure. And suddenly, he approached me, getting closer. like he wanted to eat me. And because I was scared, I screamed as loud as I could. But no one heard my screams, even though I was close to the dormitory and the dormitory door was open. A few moments later, someone patted my shoulder. I was shocked, and I was asked, "What happened to you?" I said my motorbike is not on. And the person confirmed that his motorbike was on. And at that time my motorbike was on, and even his motorbike was on. But when I experienced that, it was all real, and the motorbike died. I don't know what happened to me. I wanted to drive back to the dormitory as fast as possible. I put the motorbike through the side door of the dormitory. From that door it opened to the back of the dormitory, and I saw a well without a light. I put the motorbike through the side door of the dormitory. From that door it opened to the back of the dormitory, and I saw a well without a light. Then I went to the middle room of the house. Asked my friend who was sitting near the door. "Didn't you see me screaming earlier, and my motorbike wouldn't start?" My friend replied, "I saw you, but you only got off the motorbike, and then you squatted down." I reiterated that my motorbike had indeed died. My friend replied again, "Earlier you only turned off the motorbike. Then you got off the motorbike. Then you squatted down near the motorbike. I thought what you were doing." I felt strange and surprised by the incident. I forgot about the incident of the motorbike not starting. During the morning briefing, we got a schedule to guard the house for 1 week. All my friends went home, and the ones who were guarding the house this week were me, Novi, and April. A few moments later my friend, named Novi, asked permission to go home today to get clothes. And she promised to arrive back at the dorm before 9 p.m. So at home there were only me and April at that time. April and I worked together to clean the house, sweep and mop the floor, so that the house feels comfortable. When it was almost evening, there was no news from Novi at all. Even at 10 o'clock, Novi called me. But it was not her who called but her boyfriend. I answered the phone. Suddenly, she said something like this, "Hello. I want to ask if something happened to Novi." Because when Novi arrived home, her family asked her, she didn't answer. She was just silent and stared blankly. After a few moments after finishing the call, Novi was taken by her boyfriend to the dormitory, because he was on a dormitory guard's schedule. When she arrived at the dormitory, Novi usually said hello first before entering the house. But this time she just went straight in and didn't say anything, and just sat down. When Novi sat in the briefing chair, I asked her how she was. But she was just silent and didn't answer, and her gaze was not towards me, but in a different direction. At one point, I took the initiative to get Novi a drink. A glass of water was in front of her, and she didn't want to drink it either. I said, "Drink it, so that your body will feel better and fitter again." I held the glass of water to give it to her, but she refused and pushed my hand away. At first I was confused. Then I took the initiative to pray for the glass of water, and then, without further ado, I rubbed the water on her face. Suddenly, Novi fainted. I was confused. April and I carried her together to a room to lay her down. A few moments later, Novi suddenly woke up, but with her eyes closed. At first, Novi seemed to be having a seizure. But at that moment there was a black figure behind Novi's head. And not only I saw it, but my friend April also saw it. The black figure stood with glaring eyes and a very angry expression. He looked into my eyes with emotion. And he said to me, "Don't mix it in." After that, he disappeared. I don't understand why the figure said that to me. Novi was unconscious from 11 to 3 a.m. Few moments later, I called her boyfriend to ask for help, informing Novi's family. And her boyfriend agreed. When 1 p.m. arrived, her family came to the dormitory. Her family visited the dormitory to see Novi's unconscious condition. Her grandfather and father entered the room where Novi was lying. April and I were in the living room waiting. Something strange happened to me. I saw smoke in the living room. I asked April, "Did you see smoke in this living room?" She said she didn't see anything. "Don't think about strange things," she said to me. Even though I saw it clearly, and not long after, I smelled the aroma of grave, soil and incense. The aroma was very attached to my nose. Not long after that, her father and grandfather came out of Novi's room. Well, I was given a message by Novi's father and father to always hold a keris or a small knife. Her father and grandfather went home. At 6 p.m. arrived. April and I stayed at home, and a few moments later, I told April to go to sleep, because I was used to staying up late. At first April was afraid to sleep alone, but I calmed her down, and so that I could stay awake at night for fear that something strange would happen again to Novi, and April fell asleep. A few hours later, when I was playing with my cell phone, I heard something in my ear, like this. I immediately looked towards the sound. When I saw it, turned out, there was a figure of a grandmother, holding a stick and wearing a hijab, and she smiled at me. But her smile was not like an ordinary human, but a smile with wide lips that reached her ears. I was shocked and wanted to scream, but couldn't. All I saw was her figure. The grandmother walked to the kitchen, and when I looked back, the figure disappeared. When the figure disappeared, I was shocked and very scared. I ran to the room and covered my body with a blanket to sleep. And I fell asleep that night. In the morning, I called the branch manager at my office to tell him what happened yesterday. Monday, at the morning briefing, yesterday's incident will be discussed with the branch manager. At first I never asked Novi about the incident. Monday arrived, and during the briefing, I asked Novi something, "Why were you possessed at that time?" And she answered what was possessed, because I didn't know and didn't remember at all what happened yesterday. I just realized that I was holding a keris now. Who is the keris from? Why am I holding the keris? I answered it was a gift from my grandfather and father, to always be held and not to be released or stored anywhere. I dared to ask Novi something. At first, Novi didn't want to answer. I asked, "What's wrong with you?" Novi answered nothing. However, in the end, Novi told me that she had a boyfriend who had broken up with her because he didn't want to be with her anymore, or with her ex, because now she was in a relationship with someone new. and her ex told Novi, if you don't want to marry me, then I will continue to bother you, and I will send black magic into your life. A few moments later, when I was busy chatting with many people in the dormitory, suddenly I was possessed, and I bullied the table so that I climbed onto the table like a tiger. That's what my friend said. Not long after that, I realized that at that time my friend was possessed again by someone else, not Novi. When I held her, I was possessed again. I woke up when I was in a room because when I was possessed and after I was unconscious, my friends took me to the room, and when I woke up, I opened my eyes. I saw a figure named Pocong. He looked at me from a very close distance, and Pocong's face was destroyed. Severe and blood dripped from the Pocong's face and hit my forehead. And I was unconscious after seeing the figure. When I regained consciousness, it turned out that I could regain consciousness because I was treated by someone named Paranormal. He was the one who knew better, and he told me that I should not interfere, and I was confused what I interfered with. And he told me that my friend was indeed affected by magic from someone, that if I interfered in his affairs, the magic would turn back on me. I just kept quiet, and when the paranormal creature left, I and my 3 friends started working again. But I didn't leave the house. I stayed in the dormitory because I was afraid. At that time I was with my friends in the living room, and because I had to go to the kitchen to drink a glass of water, and when I was going to drink the water, suddenly I heard in the warehouse. And as far as I know, the warehouse has never been opened and is always locked. When I finished drinking, suddenly I heard a loud knock on the door from the warehouse. And I said, "Who?" And there was no answer back. I moved to the living room, then I sat down while calming myself down. At that time, the afternoon arrived, and we were doing a night briefing. There were 12 people present at the briefing. The branch head was explaining a job, but suddenly I saw a shadow behind him that passed by, but when I looked, the shadow was gone. I returned to focus on listening to the briefing conversation, and the shadow passed by again, and it became clearer that the shadow was a black figure. I took the initiative to look towards the kitchen, so I left the briefing for a moment. Finally, the briefing was over. Some people went home, and 5 people stayed overnight. In this dormitory, there are 3 rooms, and at that time, there were 2 people who were already asleep. At 12 midnight, I went to take a shower because that night, I finished the files that I had to work on until 12:00 midnight. While taking a shower, I also washed clothes. While washing clothes, I heard the sound of something on the roof of my toilet, but I thought it was a rat. However, the noisy sound became clearer in my ears. So I said, "Rat, oh rat." Not long after, the sound became quiet. I looked towards the roof, where there was a hole. And suddenly I saw a hair coming out of the hole. I thought it was a black rope. But when I kept looking at it, it turned out to be hair, and it went down very quickly. The longer I looked, the deeper and more hair came down from the hole. Finally, I was shocked, panicked, and scared. I ran to the room where my friend was, and in that room I looked towards the window. there was a figure of Pocong. At that time, I was shaking, my body was covered by a thick blanket. And at that time my friend who felt I was scared, woke up, and asked what was wrong. I went towards the window and my friend saw it. He immediately covered it with a pillow and I covered it again with a blanket. When I woke up, the window was gone, and I got up to cover the window. When I wanted to turn back towards the bed, it turned out my friend was gone, even though the door to the room was locked. I was confused. I rushed to look at the other room. After opening it, there was no one. And I returned to my room. It turned out they were in the same position, even though it was clear that after I closed the window they were not there. Maybe because I was tired I hallucinated my assumption like that, so I could sleep soundly and peacefully. The next day I woke up, because I felt hungry at 2 p.m. I went to the kitchen and cooked noodles. When I cooked noodles, I heard a sound. I saw no one. And not long after that, I heard a noisy warehouse. It sounded like someone opening a book, knocking on the door, and the sound of footsteps. When I glanced at an open kitchen door, suddenly appeared the figure of an old woman and a black shadow figure. And they were holding hands. Those figures that I had seen before. At that time the old woman was just silent, but the black shadow figure seemed to approach me. I immediately closed my eyes, and when I opened my eyes, the figure was right in front of my face. I fell to the floor, and I passed out unconscious. I was unconscious until the next day at 7 a.m. When I woke up, people were already crowded in the dormitory, asking me, "Why you sleep in the kitchen?" said my friends. And my position was curled up on the cooking place. It was beyond my reason. And I only answered my friends, "I just fell asleep." And the rest, I didn't answer it. When everything had been discussed, and my friends felt that I myself was feeling fine. And at that time, I felt like there was a loud noise, even though I saw my friends in the room were calm, even though none of them were doing any meaningful activities. I felt that at that time, the room was very noisy. That night, we had another briefing at 20 o'clock p.m. and the briefing ended at 10 p.m. Everyone in the dormitory was told to go home first, and at that time, I was invited with my friend, who was also heading in the same direction to go home together. But at that time, I felt unable to go home, because maybe my body was very tired, and I needed a lot of rest. But I forced myself to go home to accompany my friend too. The story is, my friend and I left. After leaving the dormitory alley, I headed to the main highway. At that time, I almost had an accident on a sharp bend because I thought the road was not well lit. However, the car behind me honked, so I braked suddenly, so as not to fall off the motorbike. At that time, I was the one driving the motorbike, and my friend scolded me to stay focused on the road. After a while, my friend was driving the motorbike. Now I'm behind. The motorbike is driven by my friend. So I was tied with a rope by my friend, so that I wouldn't fall off the motorbike. I arrived in front of my house. After I got off the motorbike, and was about to go into the house, I suddenly fainted. They said I was possessed again. And I said I was taken into the house by my family. The next day I woke up. and was about to go back to work to the dormitory. I was picked up by my friend, who took me home yesterday. When on the way I asked my friend, "Where are you going?" "Don't think strangely. We are going to the dormitory," said my friend. And I asked again, "Who are you?" "I am your work colleague," said my friend. The motorbike stopped, and my friend looked at me. I asked, "Who are you? Where am I now?" As if I don't remember anything. My friend told me that, so I knew about this incident. When I arrived at the dormitory, I didn't want to enter the dormitory, and suddenly, I didn't want to meet Novi. I was only accompanied by my friend named Rika. And at that time I joined Rika in the fieldwork, because I thought if I stayed in the dormitory, I was afraid something would happen to me. When I arrived at a customer village, I was dropped off. And I just stayed in a shady place where I usually rested when working in the field. Rika gave me advice with her fear. "Don't do anything strange, because I'm getting married in 3 days," Rika said to me. Rika went to the customer's house, and I waited for her. Not long after Rika left, there was a woman who said something like this to me. "That's what happens when you interfere in other people's business. So you're the one who gets hit by their magic." I heard that, but I didn't answer it, and it seemed like I didn't realize it. A few moments later, Rika came to pick me up again. "Come on, you need to be treated. I'll take you to someone who can." "I'll come along." From here to the destination house is very far, because the distance is almost 2 hours, 30 minutes. Passing through a village, arriving there, it was almost evening. Rika's father asked Rika, "What's wrong with my child?" Rika answered, she didn't know, "Father. Since today she doesn't remember who she is, where she works. Basically she doesn't remember who father is," said Rika. We entered her father's house, and I was laid on the sofa in the living room of his house. When I was being treated by Rika's father, Rika's father said your friend was followed by a Kuntilanak figure. When I was being treated, I saw in front of me, she was standing on my stomach. This Kuntilanak figure has a tall and big body. The left side of her face is damaged. The right side of her face with eyes that are slightly protruding from her eyelids. And she smiled. Her smile was with a very wide mouth to the ears. When Rika's father gave me a glass of water, and when I drank it, it felt like I couldn't swallow it. And finally, I spit out the water from my mouth. But what came out was not water, but sand. Not long after I coughed, and coughed out something else, a pebble. Rika's father said luckily this child was brought on time. After that, I just daydreamed and sat still. In my heart I said, "What's wrong with me?" A few moments later, Rika told me that I was at Rika's house. "You are being treated by my father," said Rika. The day was getting late. I was picked up by my work friends. There were 4 motorbikes that picked me up. We left Rika's house to go to the dormitory. At first, nothing strange happened on the way. But, when we were almost at the dormitory, the dormitory looked dark. Because my friends who were in the field had not returned to the dormitory. I got off the motorbike and arrived at the dormitory. Suddenly I heard, "Finally home." And I looked and there was no one there. I went into the dormitory intending to lie down and rest in the room. When I had entered the room and I was alone, suddenly there was another grandmother figure and she said, "Just follow me. You won't be hurt." I was shaking, and I didn't understand what the figure was talking about. My friends were in the middle room of the dormitory, because they were having a briefing, and I was ordered to rest. At that time I fell asleep. The next morning I did my usual activities. Before my friends and I went to work in the field, we did a briefing first. And during that time everything was fine. Normal activities for 3 days. And the time came the next day. My friends all went out at 7 p.m. to play or hang out. Because there were a lot of motorbikes in the dormitory, I intended to guard the dormitory. Because I was a little scared, I opened the dormitory door. I sat on the front porch of the dormitory and they left. Not long after, there was something that fell at the dormitory gate. I thought it was a coconut falling from its tree, but the longer the sound was repeated. I immediately stood up and looked at it. And the result was nothing. I was about to sit down again, it sounded again. And when I stood up again, it was very clear. I saw the figure of a woman I had never seen before. She was wearing green cloth and a blue scarf. There she stood and glanced at me with a wide smile to her ears. Suddenly I panicked and was scared. I closed the door and I ran inside. I sat down and intended to call my friends. When I took the phone and wanted to make a call, suddenly someone knocked on the door. I put my phone away. I tried to see who was knocking from the window. And it turned out that the knocker was a Pocong figure. He knocked on the door with his own head. Suddenly, I was shocked and ran to the room. I locked the door and I made a phone call to my friend, with a trembling voice, and I said, "You guys go home now." Not long after my friends came home, and they asked me why you looked so scared. I said nothing. My friends went to chat in the room and I sat in the middle of the dormitory alone. Not long after that, I heard a noise in a room. Like someone was opening a book, typing on a laptop and so on. I thought who it was, in my mind. I saw my friends were all in the room. I sat down again. There was a sound of something falling in the room. Then I listened, from the door, by putting my ear, to find out who was in it. It turned out there was a sound of and suddenly, I panicked, and I ran to the room. And my friends asked me why I ran, and I said nothing. I just lay down and played with my cell phone. And I talked a little to my friends. Was this dormitory empty, or what? No, this dormitory used to be occupied by its owner, before it was rented to us, said one of my friends. I talked again, because I saw or heard a lot of strange things in this house, and there were several cases of possession. My friends didn't believe it, because while they were here, nothing happened. Except for the possession. Maybe you're hallucinating, said my friend. Didn't you hear in the next room, there was a loud bang, like something fell? I said to my friend. Nothing, I haven't heard anything since earlier, said my friend. And I asked my friend again, at the time of the incident. Who saw the figure of Pocong in the window? But my friend answered, I don't remember, and never saw the figure. With you at that time, I was sleeping. And from there I concluded that I was the only one who felt and saw the figures. I was very confused by all of this. A few moments later my friend fell asleep, but I couldn't sleep, because the atmosphere in the room at that time was very hot, so I was sweating. Even though it was late at night, and there was a fan in the room. But I felt hot. Then I sat up, and when I looked at my friend, they were not there. Same as the previous incident. I felt strange and confused. I prayed to God in my heart. If this happened to me, like beyond my reason, why it had to be like this. And I was very scared. I opened the door and checked the room next to it. It turned out that my friends were all here. And I woke them up, wake up, wake up. My friend woke up and asked what was wrong. I said, didn't you guys sleep in the room next to this room? No, from the beginning, we entered the dormitory. We all went into this room to sleep in this room. In my mind, who did I talk to in my room earlier? I tried to ask my friend, but they said no. All of us have been here since before going to bed. And my friend invited me to sleep in my room, and be accompanied. We went to my room, and my friend and I fell asleep. When we were sleeping, and the sun was starting to rise, suddenly someone threw a stone at the glass window so that the glass broke. Suddenly everyone woke up from their sleep. And only a small pebble was found at that time. In the morning we looked for information from local security and discussed the chronology, but people said that there was no one. And at that time the weather was drizzling. And we did a briefing. When we finished the briefing, I got news that my assignment was transferred to another location. Because I was going to move locations, I wanted to prepare and tidy up my things. I got the news at night around 7 p.m. when I was tidying up my clothes. I heard a sound next to the bathroom. And I saw that there was no one. And when I finished tidying up my clothes, I heard another voice. Where are you going, kid? With a voice like an old woman. I was shocked and leaned against the wall. And I quickly tidied up her clothes. The story is that I left the dormitory to go to a dormitory that was in a different location and far from the previous dormitory. I arrived at a new dormitory. In the new dormitory, the house is much bigger than the previous dormitory. I was introduced to friends who were already in the dormitory, and all the residents of this dormitory were women. They were all in the same company as me. And I thought I would be calmer in the new dormitory, but in reality, the event was worse than the previous dormitory. In the dormitory there was a pool that had not been used for a long time, so it was dirty and filthy. And none of my friends dared to go there except during the day. For a month I lived here in the new dormitory. Everything felt safe, and there were no strange events. In the second month there was an incident. At around 9 o'clock, and we were going to do a briefing, my pregnant friend called me and asked something. Didn't you see anything earlier? Or was it just me hallucinating? I haven't seen anything since earlier. She said, look, in front of our dormitory. There is a figure of Kuntilanak. I looked out the front of the dormitory, and it turned out to be there. And I told my friend, okay, just let us brief. When the briefing was over, I went to the toilet and the kitchen door opened. Suddenly, the door opened by itself. And it turned out that suddenly, there was a shroud and a black figure. And I felt like they were going to attack me. Suddenly I was shocked and ran towards my friends, who were gathering, and they were shocked and asked me why, and I answered nothing. Then I sat down. Not long after, my friend, who was pregnant, named Dion, felt a stomachache and she asked permission to go home. And the next day, Dion told us that she had a miscarriage and her baby was lost in her womb. We were all shocked. The chronology was that Dion felt severe pain before sunrise, and there was no bleeding at all. When she checked her pregnancy with the doctor and the baby was gone, Dion went to the dormitory for a week, and she told me, when my stomach hurt, you know, there was no laughter at that time. What kind of sound? I said. Like, maybe, I think you are hallucinating. And she said to me again, I went to a shaman and asked about my pregnancy. And she answered that your child was taken by one of the evil figures. After that, we chatted, and this incident was beyond human. Reason? Because the fetus in the womb could just disappear. 1 week later, I was sitting in the back at 8 p.m. with my 5 friends. Suddenly there was the sound of something falling from the roof, and the 5 of us wanted to see it. It turned out that we all saw a ball glowing red on the roof. One of my friends said that we had to hurry into the house and no one should go out. Suddenly, we ran into the dormitory. And at midnight, there was a knock on the door and none of us dared to open it. We ignored it, and when it was 2:30 a.m., there was another knock. And we listened to the knock. But the longer we listened to the knock, the faster it got. We dared to go out of the room to see it. Finally, I looked through the window gap from the corner of the room to see who was knocking on the door. And when I peeked, it turned out that the one who knocked on the door was the figure of Pocong that I had seen in the dormitory before, because I remember the figure of Pocong from his destroyed face. Suddenly I was shocked and I invited my friends to enter the room. We turned off the lights in our room. A few moments later, after everyone had fallen asleep, suddenly the water tap in the toilet turned on. I counted my friends, there were 4 people. I went to the toilet and it turned out that the water tap was on. Then I turned off the water tap and lay down again. Suddenly, the water tap turned on again. In my mind, is it true that the figure in the dormitory followed me back? I don't believe all this happened. And when I looked out the window, I saw the figure of Pocong again. But this Pocong figure was the first time I saw it in my entire life. Namely, the Pocong with 3 heads. And I was very scared, covering my face with a pillow and in a cold sweat because of fear. Suddenly someone nudged me. Be quiet, I'm scared, I said. But there was no answer. I thought it was my friend who nudged me. And it turned out that the Pocong figure with 3 heads was in front of me. I was shocked, and I screamed as loud as I could so that my friend woke up from his bed. "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong with you?" said my friend. "There was a Pocong figure," I said with my face covered by a pillow.